I I want to introduce Mike DiPaolo, who is my colleague on the Delaware Heritage Commission. Mike was also for a good while the executive director of the Lewis Historical Society. And the January meeting, we talked about, what needed to be done, what we should be thinking about to set up a historical society. And I thought Mike would be sort of the perfect person to do that. So I'll let Mike introduce himself. But Mike, what are the kinds of things that a group that wants to set up a historical society ought to be thinking about?
Well, Terry, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for coming out this evening, and thank you for your interest in preserving Delaware's history. Like Terry mentioned, I do have the privilege and honor of serving on the Heritage Commission with him. And I was thinking back, I'm not a native Delawarean, but my aunt and uncle lived in Brandywine 100, and my aunt just recently passed away last year, but my cousins all grew up in the Tallyville area on Halstead Road. I always think of it near the old county library branch, but right across the street from the Unitarian Church there. And so I do have a little connection and remember fond visits to Aunt Sally and Uncle Jack's house up there. But I would say, certainly, I was the director of the Lewis Historical Society for close to 20 years, and certainly had a lot to work with. That organization was founded in the 60s. But I would say that I also helped start the Delaware River and Bay Lighthouse Foundation, which is an organization that owns actually Harbor of Refuge Lighthouse, which is the white lighthouse down here at Cape Penlopen. So when you come down here, the Breakwater Lighthouse, East End Lighthouse, the red one is the famous one that everybody takes pictures of because you can see it and it's close to land, etc. The Harbor of Refuge is a little further out. So I would say that kind of addresses one thing, and that's visibility, right? I mean, you're doing this because you want people to understand the value of history. You want people to understand the value of history in Brandywine 100, of which there's obviously a lot, and that public relations is key, and communication is key, and getting your story out there is key. And then to that end, what is that story, and what are you going to be trying to do as a historical society? A lot of historical societies obviously own properties, right? I mean, Lewis does, Newcastle Historical Society, the Delaware Historical Society. I think all the historical societies do. They also have collections, right? I mean, they have photographs, you have artifacts, you have papers, you have a variety of things. I think that's the one thing that I really enjoyed the most is seeing what was going to walk through the door next. And you really don't know, and are you prepared to take that? Are you prepared to care for it? Do you have a place to keep it, an adequate place to keep it? And are you going to be focused on that kind of history? Are you going to be focused on the artifacts? Are you going to be focused on the archives, telling that history, helping people with their research questions, the reference aspect of that? The more you're out there, the more questions people are going to have. What's the history of my house? My great-great-grandmother is buried there somewhere. Can you help me find her? I'm interested in this company. I'm interested in this and that, the other thing. There is also, upstate, maybe more than a downstate influence. You have the Delaware Historical Society. What's the relationship like with that organization? I don't mean now, but like moving forward too. And are you, if you're going to be in the historic properties game, are you going to be an advocate for historic preservation? Some historical societies are pretty strongly organized and have strong opinions about historic preservation. Others don't want to get near it because it's a pretty political subject, right? I mean, demolitions in the county, demolitions across the state, demolitions in any municipalities there may be. I think what might be is Claymont the only real municipality in Brandywine 100?
So Claymont is actually not a municipality.
Okay.
It's thought of that way. There are 4 municipalities. There's the 3 Ardens, Ardentown, and Ardencroft.
Right.
And there's also the town of Bellefonte.
Bellefonte, gotcha. Okay. I always assumed Claymont was
Claymont, by the way, has its own historical society.
I knew they did. Maybe that's why I thought that they were a municipality. So And the relationship, what's the relationship like with that one too? And I was always a big advocate of, and I still am, of collegiality, collaboration. We're all in this together, right? Delaware's a small state, and the history community in the state of Delaware is a pretty small one too. So, relationships are key. Obviously it's wonderful to have someone like Dee, who's on board with this, and she can help to bring some of her connections and introductions and to different people. But I think, really deciding what you want to get into and what you don't want to get into, and maybe, in terms of preservation, in terms of acquisitions, in terms of administration too, right? It's if you're a group that can exist almost solely online, that speaks to pretty low cost. If you start to acquire things, if you acquire property, costs start to go up. I was at one point in time the president of the Small Museum Association too, and had the misfortune of being president during the great economic crisis, or whatever we're calling it now, of 2008 and 9. And I was interviewed by the New York Times, and I remember saying something to the effect of, like, small museums are basically the smaller the institution, the better they can survive a downturn like that, right? You have less to support. You don't have the staff necessarily. You can close up a little easier. So there is something to be said for that. But as an organization starts to grow, you have more costs, and you want growth, and we all want growth. We all want to see history organizations supported in Delaware, and we all want to see them thrive. But that growth comes with a lot of hard work, because there are not a lot of resources out there for organizations to turn to for financial support. I'm not sure, and I'm just being frank, I'm not sure what kind of resources the county might be able to support or provide to any organizations. I don't know what they do right now, or what it does right now to historical organizations in the county. There's a state grant and aid process, and that's a wholly political process. That's kind of fun to be involved with if you're up for that kind of stuff, and a trip down to Dover, and kind of elbow your way in there to get what you want, and talk to your state reps and state senators about their support. Terry and I serve on the Heritage Commission, and despite our capacity to give out grants, they are relatively small and not designed for general operating support. So that kind of leaves you with, of course, with a membership strategy, fundraising strategies, special events, which are a lot of work in and of themselves. And you kind of have to, after a while, you start to, do that cost benefit analysis. You might be raising $10,000 or $20,000 when it takes you half a year to plan and $10,000 to put it on. Is that really worth that extra $10,000 really worth it? And can your efforts be better directed elsewhere? Just to put into some context, when I was at Lewis, when I started, my first day of work was September 10th, 2001, my first official day as executive director. And of course, the next day, everything changed. And that day when I started, the budget for the society was just a little less than $70,000. So it was about $69,000 or so. And at that time, we had about 12 historic properties to maintain, and all the collections and all the events and all that stuff, plus me now, right? I was the first paid staff person. So it was a little daunting, a little challenging. And by the time I moved on, and now I'm the vice president for Southern Delaware at the Delaware Community Foundation, we had a staff of about 16 people and roughly $1 million budget. So it can be done. It takes a while. Not every organization needs to have that kind of growth trajectory. Not every area can support that. So it really comes down, and Lewis was not afraid to take a stand in terms of preservation, and that frankly upset some people. It upset people either way, right? I mean, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't sometimes. Why aren't you trying to save this? And why did you speak out against that? Or why did you speak up for this? Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you doing less? Be more visible, shut up and mind your business, sort of an attitude. You're getting it from all sides, from all directions. But at the same time, people also want you to have an opinion, right? And, if you're involved in these kind of things, you got to have an opinion, and people respect you for doing that too. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of issues in Brandywine 100 and preservation issues, but that would be something I would, counsel you on to have a, I don't know if policy is too strong of a word, too formal of a word, but really think about that one, because if you're out there, people are going to say, well, what do you think about the so-and-so house? What does the historical society think about this property? And to be on the same page and to realize that there's both good and bad, or not good and bad, but there's both positive and negative consequences in people's minds. Because sometimes, unfortunately, down here, and I'm sure it's similar up there, developers tend to have big checkbooks. And, when you have to balance that need for the practical benefits of keeping the lights on or preserving the property with historic preservation, sometimes it's, especially in a small area like Delaware and Brandywine 100 or Lewis. And then, the second part is, acquiring property, looking at the Lewis Historical Society. They started in 1962. And they just started acquiring properties, and I'm not sure they had a real plan, to be quite honest with you. People got tired. That's the other thing. You're sort of the founders of an organization here. You're all embarking on, and that group, started to certainly not fall apart, but they started to drop out. About a decade in, 8-10 years in, everybody was exhausted. What are we doing here? How are we going to support this? Who's the next generation? Back then, looking at Lewis, there were a lot of older folks who did that. I don't know exactly how old they were, but I see some folks who look like they might be about my age or maybe younger than me, which is fantastic. I'm usually the youngest one in the room, even though I've been doing this for 20 some years, I'm usually still the youngest person in the room. So it's great to see people who are interested and who can maybe carry that torch and be this generation and the next generation of leadership too for an organization. So that's something to definitely think of. But I don't know if there's any properties on your radar in terms of acquiring anything, or if there's any collections out there, but those are two serious things to think about. Because it really, even if it's a free house, there's no such thing as a free house, right? We all know all the work it takes to maintain our own properties, let alone one that doesn't belong to you. That's a 501c3. That's part of the historical society, for all the good and the bad that phrase carries, right? And let's just be honest, sometimes when you say historical society, what do people think of, right? I mean, how many times did I hear someone call it the hysterical society? Oh, you're just complaining about this, blah, blah, blah. So, it's, there's a lot of financial considerations, acquiring a property, acquiring collections. I don't know what kind of collections are out there for Brandywine 100. If folks who have old family letters and ledgers from businesses and photo collections and things of that nature, but those are all good to start to have a handle on, and some people are very grateful. I'll admit, I mean, sometimes the best thing that happened for somebody was, oh, thank goodness that you came and asked me about this, because I didn't know what I was going to do with it. It's sitting in my attic. My husband was a collector. I didn't want to get rid of it, but I just didn't know what to do with it. So yes, please take it. Then there were other people who said, no, absolutely not. You can copy things. That's fine. And we were happy. That was great to be able to at least have the information. But, some people hold on to these things pretty tightly for one reason or another. And then some people just said, I'm not going to give it to you, but I'm not giving it to anybody. And those are the worst people, because they literally, they would just throw it away rather than give it to the historical society. And I never understood that. But, along with that, I think you always have to remember, to us, sometimes it can be, I don't want to say academic, but we have a research interest in this. We want to figure things out. We have questions we want to answer. We want to have other people answer questions. But for a lot of people, these things that they're giving you, whether they're objects or photographs or papers, they're personal, right? They're family history. And sometimes they have secrets. Sometimes they have things in there they don't want you to find out. Or they'd be embarrassed, or they know their ancestors would be embarrassed about, or something along those lines. And I think it's always important to remember that when you're doing history like this, Brandywine 100 Historical Society, Lewis Historical Society, when you're doing local history, it's about people. And it's about, who was it? Was it Bonnie who said that your aunt was, folk and everything of that nature? I mean, it's the same. I mean, that's what any local historical society down here, it's the Birdinghams and the Burtons and the Ingrams and so forth, and the Pointers and the Painters. And you're trying to, be really respectful, because it means something to people. They're real people. They're just not abstract stories. They're just not funny little vignettes. I mean, they were real people. So I think, keeping that in mind as you embark, that it's a really personal journey for a lot of people just not one about a ghost story here or there, the old, ports along the river or whatever it might be. There are real people involved. So, and I mentioned the Lighthouse Foundation, and I mentioned that because one, that is a group that I helped start, and they actually own Harbor of Refuge Lighthouse. So that lighthouse is actually owned by the Delaware River Bay Lighthouse Foundation, and they have a unique challenge, and it's not anything you would ever run into or most groups. But let me just explain what they have to do, because maybe it'll make what you're trying to think about sound a little bit more feasible even. They have to go out to the lighthouse on a launch, and the launch comes down from Slaughter Beach, picks people up at the Cape May Lewis Ferry Terminal, and then they have to go out about a mile to Harbor Refuge Lighthouse and get off a boat that could be rocking and on swells about 3 to 4 feet, right onto a dock that may or may not be there, into a steel lighthouse that's on a breakwater whose southern end upon which it sits is falling into Delaware Bay. And throw on top of all that, it's still an active aid to navigation. So when you're down here and you see the lights swinging around, the Coast Guard has to get in there a couple times a year at least to check on things and make sure it's all working, replace lights and everything. And they have to try to take tours out there too. All right, people love to see the lighthouse. So that's all to say that they've had a tremendous amount of challenges, right? And they're still around. They've tried other things. The East End Lighthouse for a little bit, the Taylor's Bridge Lighthouse up closer to you guys down near the canal, or just over the canal when you're coming down there. And they have a hard time because their lighthouse is visible, right? It's certainly an icon, but it's also a secondary icon, right? It's that red lighthouse, the East End Lighthouse, is the icon for Delaware. You see it everywhere, right? It's everywhere, at least down here it is. And they have a hard time telling their story because they get mixed up so often with other properties. And you're up there, you're in one of the most historic parts of the United States, right? You cross the line into Chadds Ford and Brandywine, you have downtown Wilmington, Philadelphia. You have other smaller historic attractions like the Newcastle Historical Society, the Hale Burn House, et cetera. I don't have to enumerate them all for you. I'm sure you're aware of most of them. And, so you have to figure out a way, how do you stand out? What's your story all about? And, thinking about my time in Lewis, that was also a little bit about what we had to do, is how do we tell our story? It was a little different because we were more or less, we had the Zwannendale Museum and the lighthouse and everything, but we were one of the larger history organizations in the town. But what was our big competition? And that was the beach. When people are coming down in the summer, they're not coming down to take a tour of a 250-year-old house anymore necessarily. They're going to the beach, and they're going out to the restaurants, and there's always a new restaurant in town. And how do we get that crowd, and do we want to get that crowd? Is that really, it's important to us, don't get us wrong. There's thousands of people that come through the summer, but our real audience and your real audience is your local community. It's the people who are going to be your members. It's the people who are going to be your donors, who are going to be your volunteers. And, to think that, everyone's going to stop by on their way, their side light trip from, Chadds Ford, to our historic property, or they're going to make a little day of it and go to Newcastle and Brandywine and Newark. Well, maybe not, but the real meat of what you need to do is address Brandywine 100. And I was always pretty resolute about that our focus is Lewis. People love Lewis. That was a huge thing we could hang our hat on. But our story had to be about Lewis, and we were going to be relentlessly unapologetic about focusing on Lewis and promoting Lewis. So, and you guys have a much larger area, a much larger demographic, much more diverse demographics than Lewis does and ever would. And you can use that. I think it's wonderful to be a bit of a regional organization in a state that doesn't really have any. There's the Delaware Historical Society. There's, then beyond that, you have a whole bunch of little local town historical societies: Claymont, Newcastle, Harrington, Lewis, Milford, Milton, all the others. But there's not a regional one. I think that's something you could really make your own there, and to really reach out and say, we represent this whole area, right? So Claymont to Tallyville, however you want to think about it, or some kind of clever catchphrase, and really sink your teeth into that. But I think it really does come down to those few initial questions. How are you going to fund it? Because you are going to need funding at some point to do anything, even to incorporate. I don't know if you're incorporated. I don't know if you have a tax status yet, but even to do that, it takes a little bit of money. Not much, but it does take resources. And if you're going to acquire property, that's a whole different set of challenges. If you're going to start to acquire collections, that's a whole different set of challenges. I mentioned before, and then I'll be quiet and let Terry ask questions and open it up to the group. But one thing that I would really recommend is reaching out to. There are two great organizations I'd recommend. One, the Delaware Museum Association, which is the statewide museum organization, and I believe their current president is actually Lee Reifenberg, who's the curator at the Delaware Historical Society right now. And I just reach out to them, let them know what you guys are up to. It's primarily history organizations. The Delaware museum community is quite small. You guys could probably think of the major ones certainly offhand, the Hagleys and the Winterters and the art museums of the world, and they may be members, but the real membership bulk is small local history organizations, because that's what Delaware has a lot of. The other group that I would recommend you reach out to and that you look into is a small museum association. I mentioned that group. They have a conference every year, and you're in luck because it's usually in February, but this year, because of the COVID surge, they postponed it to early June. It's always in College Park, Maryland, which is a pretty short, relatively short car ride from northern Newcastle County down to College Park. Not the admission fee, the registration fees are pretty nominal. The Delaware Museum Association even offers scholarships. You might be able to get that cost covered for somebody to go to SMA. And that's a great place to start. I mean, a lot of the museums they have collections, they have a property, but I think it'd be a great place to go to meet some people, to hear what they're talking about, to see what some of the current challenges are. But to realize that you guys are starting from scratch too, which is sometimes not a bad place to start, because you can start off doing things thoughtfully and doing things right from the beginning. There's museum standards, there's history standards, there's preservation standards, and everybody back through time did things. They had the best intentions, but when you're getting started and you're sometimes an all volunteer led staff, an organization, you're not aware of all the standards. You're not aware of maybe how you should be doing things and cataloging things. So, there's such a great amount of resources in that area between Philadelphia and Wilmington, and of course, SMA down in College Park, that I think you could really get off to a really good start. But there's some hard decisions to make too.
Like, one of the things that I was thinking, and you touched on it a little bit, is how would you view the importance of sort of setting priorities, both in terms of, what you want to do and when you want to do it, in terms of, do you, is it important to say, okay, we're going to start off by collecting artifacts, and then we're going to move to letters, memorabilia, paper kind of thing, and then at a later date, then we're going to down the road think about acquiring a building. Is it something you think should be done linearly, or do you think it's should better just start to do it all at once?
I think but that's a great question, Terry. I think it's good to have a plan. I certainly think it's good to have a plan. I think it's good to start, if you're going to think about collections, I think it's good to start with paper-based collections, because they're kind of easier than three-dimensional objects. I mean, you have everything from a chair to a ring to a wedding dress to a large painting. Artifacts can really come in all shapes and sizes. Papers are usually pretty standard. You have things from an 11 by 17 sheet of paper down to a postcard or a few journals, and they can be relatively easily stored, whether that's in somebody's house for the time being, or a storage unit, or an arrangement with another organization. But I think it'd be, one thing I would recommend is understanding the known universe as much as you can, the known universe of what's out there already that might cover what you guys are interested in. What does DHS have? What does the state collections have? What What do the archives have? You know, what does the Bellefonte Historical Society or Claymont Historical Society rather have? Is there anybody else? I mean, who are the people out there collecting? I can certainly tell you right now, I still remember who everybody is that has all the good Lewis stuff that we weren't able to get. And you know, you'll never have a complete picture. There's always somebody out there you're not aware of, or somebody out there who lives just across the river in New Jersey, whose family lived there, or just across the line in Pennsylvania, who has a treasure trove of material that you'd be interested in. But I would certainly suggest deciding what you want to do, and forming that path. And I think, you know, once you get to a critical mass, and I don't know what that's going to be, and you don't know what that's going to be. It's going to be Bonnie saying, guys, I can't possibly keep all this stuff in my house anymore. You know, or right, or somebody saying, my husband is about to, or my wife is about to kick me out if we don't get rid of these boxes of old papers. We're going to have to do something, right? And that could just be 4 or 5 boxes, or it could be 40 or 50 boxes full of things. You know, and that leads into an element of trust. You know, each of you have a connection to Brandywine 100. But when you're, you know, and I mentioned how personal these things are to everybody, the last thing anybody wants to see happen is they give you something and then you can't find it, or they give you something and it gets lost, or they give it to you and you have a flood. And it's one thing if if it happens to the organization, but if it's in Pam's house or Terry's house or Chris's house or something, that's a bit more of an issue, right? And then you've kind of lost that trust in the community. You might have the best intentions, you might know everything there is to know about Brandywine 100, but once, you know, you've lost something, or once that goes away, you've lost a lot when you lose that trust. And so you should have a plan of what you want to collect, but you should also have a plan of where it's going to go, and who knows what everybody has, right? So it's not just Terry's stuff. Like I said, you know, sometimes people hold on to these things. You got to make sure everybody knows what it is, where it is, and most importantly, whose it is. There's another group that I'm involved with too. I'm on its collections committee, and they're sort of in a similar situation. They had a they're sort of a private group. They're sort of with the state. They had a very charismatic leader. They collected stuff. The state collected stuff. He collected stuff, and then he passed away. And so whose is what belongs to? I don't even know my prepositions or whatever now. What belongs to whom, or you know, who owns what? Where is it? Is there a clear title to it? So, you know, understanding what you want to collect, where it's going to be, and everybody's on the same page about who owns it is critical. And I think that would probably be a decent way to start. And I think that a property is really tough. I mean, it's a really tough thing to take care of. You got to have somewhere to keep these things. You don't have to have a 200-year-old house. You don't have to have a, you know, 100-year-old house. You know, you need someplace secure to keep these things, though.
Mike, would you say that it's valuable sort of at the start? Now, the Lewis Historical Society existed before you came there. So, but before you start of having some kind of a narrative about, you know, why do we have a Brandywine 100 Historical Society? What's important about Brandywine 100? Now, everybody on this call might know that, or at least have an opinion about that. But do you think something needs to be set out sort of more formally of, you know, why we're doing this?
Oh yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to have a mission statement. It's critical to have a vision too, you know, and I don't think, you know, don't let yourself get tripped up between you know, some consultant's view of what a difference between a vision statement and a mission statement is. You know, you kind of, you know, the difference. But when you when you go out and talk to people, you need to be on the same page, right? You need to have, what is the mission? Is it that preservation emphasis? Is it the history emphasis? Is it the, and when I say history, I mean the collections emphasis. And you need to communicate that, and you need to raise awareness. I think, you know, whether you want to get involved in political issues, and I use that with a small p, you know, or if you want to, you know, simply let everybody know what's, you know, how history connects to Brandywine 100. And I think I followed your Facebook page the other day, formally liked it, and you know, there's probably every day, a connection that you could draw between current events and Brandywine history. And putting those out there, letting people know that it's there, sharing your mission is critical, because that's what you need to do is share things. I can't emphasize that enough, is, not to hide that under a basket, but to be proud of your mission and to get it out there, and to be able to explain why you're doing that. That we're not focused on the preservation issues. Maybe that's for a different organization, but we're here for the history aspect of things and to share that. So that mission is really important.
Anybody besides me have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do want to say that what Mike was saying about collections and items really kind of resonated with me. Being involved in a very small historical society who does not own their own property. They are actually, it's owned by the township. And the tendency has been for people to want to donate things, which is wonderful. But when you're looking at limited space, I kind of walked around with a critical eye the other day and seeing a lot of things that aren't on display and a lot of things that don't really add up to a clear picture. I mean, all of them may be valuable in different ways, but they don't tell a cohesive story. And what do you do when you're in that position? I'd like to hear what you think.
Sure. Well, I think that, there's sort of two parts to that. And the first is, by definition, a museum usually only has, I think, or not by definition, but statistics show that museums only have like anywhere from 2 to 10 or 20% of their collection on display at any given time. And when you're talking about archives, that percentage is probably minuscule, because, you could have hundreds of thousands of pages in any given collection. And I always thought of it along the lines, especially if you're collecting papers and photographs, that I always likened it to your own memory. I called the collection, Lewis's memory. And when you're thinking about your own memory, when you're thinking about what you need to think about right now, right? And then you're having a conversation with a friend from high school, and suddenly you recall that your school colors were blue and gray. You remember the football game senior year. You remember who you went to prom with. You remember, these other aspects of your life. And then you're talking to somebody at work and you're pulling those out. And that's exactly what a museum archive is. You might not, or an archive in general. And that's what you're not really ever using it all at once, but you know it's there and you can retrieve it when you need to. And so sometimes archival collections might sit around for years until they're utilized. But the whole point is that they're there, they're cataloged, and if somebody has that question, they can come retrieve it. So I never really worry about how much is on display, but then that starts to get to the point about, when you start getting three-dimensional objects, people like to see those, they expect they're going to be exhibited. Sometimes when you leave, your great-great-grandmother's wedding dress in an exhibit window for, 30 years, the sun starts to beat on it and disintegrate. And so you got to rotate things, and hopefully people understand that. But then the other part of your question is about, things that are a piece here and a piece there, and what's going on, and how does this relate to the other? And, and then who gets to decide when things need to go, and weeding things out. And museums and archives and libraries weed all the time. In museums, it has a bit more of a formal name. It's called deaccessioning. If you've formally accepted it, you have to formally get rid of it. And DMA was actually part of a group that led to a formal deaccession policy, not for the state, but it's reflected in state law now. Because sometimes, things just show up, right? So someone says, oh, I know Dave's interested in Brandywine 100 history, so here, I'll leave this box of stuff for the Historical Society on his doorstep. And whether you want it or not, somebody's given it to you, and you may have to account for it. And those can be some real issues, but then if it makes its way into the collection, you just have to say, what is this? Does it really make sense? I always tended to be probably a bit more, I'm not going to say liberal or conservative in this matter, but I tended to, at least in my mind, I did this so long, I could see the connections between different objects and different collections, and tended towards keeping more, but there certainly is a lot that you don't need to keep, but that's that's where the art comes in all this, right? I mean, it's there is a little bit of subjectivity in this. I mean, you have, you know, do you keep the whole run of, one thing I love to keep, for instance, was the, and I wish I could find the very earliest ones, were all the little Lewis telephone directories, right? Before, you know, there was the Zwannendale Club, the local ladies club, printed the little town directory from the 50s until just about a decade or so ago. You know, do you want to keep all those? Do you keep multiple copies of them? Of course you'd want to keep all of those. You know, do you need to keep every high school yearbook? Do you keep everybody's high school yearbook? Everybody wrote different notes to their friends in them. Sometimes you find there's some really cool notes. You know, how do you make those decisions? Those are the kind of decisions, I don't want to say they keep you up at night, but they make you think a little bit, right? I mean, how do you really decide what gets kept and what doesn't? But that's part of the art of it. And that's part of what, you know, as you evolve, you would, you know, you probably would start off with some kind of collections policy, what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep, and what you'll take and what you don't want to take. You know, if you don't feel comfortable taking, you know, three-dimensional objects, maybe you want to say, you know, we'll refer them to X organization. But, you know, you can't really come up with a policy that addresses everything. You know, unfortunately, that just can't be legislated away. You do have, you get a box of papers and you look at it, and sometimes you have to make a hard decision. Did I see John just went off mute?
Yes, just a sort of a comment and maybe a question. Hackney Museum is, of course, in our community, and they have a long history since the 1950s of collecting all kinds of information that relates to industrial history. And part of their process is to be very selective in what they take to make sure it sort of fits in with their vision. Also, part of their process is they digitize everything. And they're very good at that. So, and by digitizing it, it makes it more accessible to people who might want to do research about the history of Mount Pleasant High School, for example. So, so trying to collect things in a way that makes it useful for their potential users later on. So just wanted to sort of throw out that thought for this group to consider.
Yeah, oh, sure. And Hagley, I mean, Hagley's just a different beast, right? I mean, not every museum in the world can be the Hagley Museum. I mean, they're an astounding national example of you know, an archival institution, a museum institution, a library. You know, they do things first class. Not everybody has those kind of resources. And that's good. I was just going to talk about, let's see, I think Chris just put something accessible. I would say, let me direct. I was going to talk about digitizing things. And I know I have some different thoughts about this than some of my archival and museum colleagues, but I'm gonna let y'all in a little secret here. Nobody gets rich, and no organization gets rich doing this kind of work, especially at the local level. And to think that people are going to be out there paying a lot of money to come in to do research or to get a copy of a photograph just generally doesn't happen now, right? I mean, cell phones didn't exist when they existed, but not like this when I started. And, you know, so we had, you know, silly policies like you can't take pictures with your cell phone. Well, guess what? Everybody wants to take pictures with their cell phone now. You come in, you can do it at the archives now in Dover. Just get everything you want. You don't have to pay for photocopies. You just sit there and take pictures and take pictures and take pictures. So what that's to say is that just put stuff out there. If you're going to scan it, let people use it, make sure it's accessible. I mean, the archives is doing it. If you look at the Delaware Public Archives website, I mean, the Civil War papers are out there, Storm of '62. Maybe it's not a version you could print. If you were going to do a book, you'd still might have to call and say, hey, I'd like to put this in a book. And that's common professional courtesy anyway, and also probably a copyright requirement. But share the history, get it out there. It's not doing any good if it's just sitting on a thumb drive on your desk, or if it's just sitting in a bunch of boxes. You know, with that said, I mean, there's a lot of paper out there in the world. You know, the vast majority of the world's archives are not scanned because there's just so much out there, right? And there's an expectation now that things are online. But that's just not feasible, especially with smaller local collections all the time. And there's, you know, lists and lists and lists of professional digitization standards, but the most important thing is to get it out there, right? I mean, I think these things and that's a great surrogate. That's what the official word is, a surrogate. You know, and the idea of putting it donating it to another organization, but keeping the digital copy. I think as long as there's a understanding that you've digitized it and your intention is to make it publicly accessible on your website, that's a conversation you'd have to have with UD or the Delaware Historical Society. But I'm firmly in the camp of information yearns to be free, right? I think we've all seen that with the internet. And the more you can put out there, frankly, the more awareness you build in your organization, the more awareness you build in history, it all kind of cycles back through. It becomes a good kind of vicious cycle. So, and I saw Dave, did you have your hand? You do have your hand up.
I had a couple of questions about just that come from listening to you talk about getting started. Could you comment a little more about groups that might not have a physical building, but get started with an on-the-ground presence with something like physical historical markers? I'm thinking of the Brandywine Springs markers that I think were, put up by a small group commemorating the amusement park there. And I think they were built for probably not, those markers were probably constructed for not a whole lot of money by, if I recall correctly, a local Votech school. So I was just wondering whether that would be kind of a not as expensive way to start creating a presence on the ground and an appreciation of local history. The other question I had is, do established historical societies ever do anything to help smaller geographical jurisdictions within their area try to get up and running? Like the Delaware Historical Society, do they encourage, some of the hundreds or some of the county groups to, is there anything they can do to help get things moving? Thanks.
Sure. No, those are good questions. I think, to answer your first part, I'm a big fan of getting your message out there, and people love historic markers. You could certainly work with the Delaware Public Archives. They're the ones who put up the formal blue and gold historic markers around the state. I'm familiar with Brandywine Springs. I can't remember if that's an official state historic marker or not, or if there's one up there, but I'm sure you've all seen them with the state seal and the old looking font that they brought back. And they're a huge boon for a couple reasons, because they get your message out. They're usually press events. Sometimes your local representatives, it's a great opportunity for your state senator and state representative to show up and be associated with that. But local markers, if you could come up with a program, maybe that's a great program even for the county. I'm not a constituent, so maybe I can say that a little bit more freely, but that's a great thing, for the county and for local municipalities and local businesses to get behind. If you could find the right of way, if you could get the marker in a spot where it's not going to impede any kind of traffic or pedestrian processes, it's going to be in a relatively safe location, and by that maybe someplace where it's not going to get vandalized. You could create a really good tour for not much money too, because there's QR codes now. You can refer back to your Facebook page. You can refer back to a website. Websites are relatively inexpensive to start and maintain. You don't have to have a fancy one. Things could link back to a Facebook page, to audio tours, to podcasts, etc. And those are very easy to do now. Right. You don't have to have a fancy recording studio. You don't have to have a bunch of fancy equipment. So if there's a way to leverage that, and if you could look at a map and say, here's a good way to list priorities, in a plan, these are the 50 most important places we want to cover in Brandywine 100. And we'll start off, this elephant by choosing 5 or 10 of them and do, maybe 10 every 2 years or something, raise some money. To do that would be a wonderful project. Local businesses would probably love to be involved, would love to have their name behind something. There's probably prominent local businesses that are historic that you'd want to include, that happen to tell other parts of a story as well. So I think that could be a great way to do things. I think historic markers are especially now, because you can make them so visual. I mean, it's not just that state marker with the blue and gold paint. You could put pictures on it, you could put a map on it, et cetera. You could refer people to the whole series of markers, the QR codes, et cetera. In terms of organizations wanting to help others, I always took the opinion that was sort of a professional duty, and Delaware was such a small state, and I think is such a small state and fosters a sense of collegiality and neighborliness, and still does, in a lot of ways, that that I would think the Delaware Historical Society would love to hear what you have to do, and to know that you're out there, to know that you're doing this work, and to figure out a way where it could be helpful. I know that it's a little difficult. I mean, obviously they're based entirely in Wilmington with the Reed House in Newcastle. So it's a very Newcastle-centered organization. I think everybody understands that. So being down in Lewis or Milton or Selbyville or something down here, it's a little kind of out of sight, out of mind. But I think, up there it has such a big presence. And, the Brandywine 100 area is such a logical constituency, just given its I was going to say political power. That's not really what I mean. I mean, like just how many people live there, right? I mean, it's a really important part of the state. So I would think that they'd want to find a way to at least listen and to see how they could be involved. But I'd also reach out to Tim Slavin. He's the director of historical and cultural affairs, to Steve Mars, who's the state archivist, and to at least let everybody know what you're doing, because ideas percolate around the area, and then somebody might come back and say, what, we could call them and see if they might want to be involved in this project.
Well, this is going back a generation, but the Brandywine Springs project included a book and some maps and some diagrams at the sites of the old amusement park rides back in the woods there. You can walk through there. I'm sure a lot of you know.
I've seen that book, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that could be a great place to start.
Yeah, there are in Brandywine 100, there are two recreation related sites that come to mind. The old amusement park at the corner of Market Street and Lee Boulevard. The foundation for the swimming pool is still there, and I remember some of the cottages that were there along Shellpot Creek when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And the pier at the end of Lower Avenue, which was I think amusement and transportation related back in the day, way before my time. But these are things that are close enough to the Greenway to possibly tie in as feeder locations, so that people on the Greenway or at Bellevue could be encouraged to, drive aside or walk aside, even bike aside, and see some of these other sites. It might, anyway, I'm talking too much, but thank you for listening.
I just want to, Mary Ann Tarrant from the Friends of Bellevue is on, and I don't know, Mary Ann, if you have the capacity to talk, but at the little Mount Pleasant Meeting House, the little church that's on the Bellevue State Park property, they did a really cool thing where, and my knowledge of technology is zero, but you can take your cell phone and go around to the different graves,
mm-hmm.
and it talks about, who's buried there, and it's a pretty it's really a pretty interesting little project, and I think you could do, and it's on a really small scale. I mean, it's probably an acre of ground. So you could, on a slightly bigger scale, I think, do something like that.
Marianne, I'd love to know what software you used for that, or what app, because I'm working with another cemetery right now that could maybe do that. But
we used at Lewis, we did a cemetery survey of Lewis and Rehoboth 100, and then we included Broadkill and Indian River hundreds as well. And they were all, by the time we were done, I mean, there were like 15,000 names in it, and across maybe like 40 cemeteries. I mean, some of them range from like 1 or 2 stones to, close to 1,000. So, I mean, it was just a remarkable number or several thousand. It was just a remarkable product. We put it all online, and it's still online, and you can search, and there's a lot you can do just with databases too to make it and then link to different things. So it's a great program, and I think we started that in 2003. Oh, and Mary Ann said her mic's not working. So
thanks, Marianne. And
I saw somebody had did he leave? Somebody had their hand up, but or looked like they were getting ready
Well,
to
I
say
was going to
something.
ask a couple questions. One, what was I going to ask you? I guess kind of following up on some of what you talked about already was, it seems to me there's a difference between, like, I come at this from a historic preservation, buildings, sites person,
Mhm.
not trained, just sort of trained by experience over the years.
Right.
But I'm not a museums person. I'm not a history archivist artifact person. So the whole idea of starting a collection or whatever is foreign to me and seems overwhelming to me. But it seems to me, I guess my question is, it seems you mentioned that, like the Small Museums Association and the Delaware Museums Association, but it seems to me like, at least what I was in my brain thinking, was not a museum of what I think of as a museum, but a historical society with collections, which obviously you want to put some of the collections on display for people to learn about. But it seems to me there's a difference between a historical society and a museum, I guess, although I'm sure they overlap a lot. But I just wonder, I don't know, maybe that's not really a question, but more of a, I don't know,
Sure.
rambling.
Well, no, I think, and it's a fair one too. I mean, I think when you look at, I'm thinking, there's the Delaware Historical Society. You can see what they do, right? There's the Newcastle Historical Society. They've got the Amstel House and the old library, et cetera. And then you've got, Lewis, and you've got the Milton Historical Society, and they have an old church, and the Rehoboth Beach Museum has a tent house and the old ice house. And so, most historical societies are, for lack of a better term, to, kind of like the attics for the community. So there's a lot of, collections that are donated there. In terms of historic preservation, obviously there's PDI, there's Preservation Delaware, there's the Delaware Preservation Fund. Beyond that, I can't think of another really local historic preservation entity, really, in the state of Delaware.
I'm not
But-
thinking it would be preservation per se. I mean,
Okay.
I do enough of that. I'm involved
Right.
in all.
Right.
My thought about all this is the historical society end of things, but
Okay.
not necessarily owning a building to own a building, but owning a building maybe to keep all our stuff in.
Right. Yeah. So do you mean by that, do you mean like a historic property?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
At some point, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's, that becomes not the signal, what's the word I'm looking for? The brand of the historical society. Everybody can point to that house, and it doesn't need to be the old 18th century house. I'm sure there's some beautiful modern homes, more modern architecture in Brandywine 100 as well. Not that it can't be an old 18th century house or something, but but that preservation aspect is a big one, right? I mean, you're obviously I know you're very well aware of that, and there's political battles to be fought on any level, whether it's the city, the county, the state, whatever, in preservation. So that's where I was going with preservation before, was whether the Brandywine Historical Society as an entity was going to be sticking its neck out saying, don't do this or do that. So but yeah, acquiring property is, and doing it right and for the right purpose, to keep stuff in. You don't need some building that's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to maintain or to heat or to keep the lights on. You need a good dry space, right? So, even starting with something like that, if somebody's willing to give a storage unit, an air conditioned, climate controlled storage unit, give the Historical Society a break. That's worth it. So, but in terms of preservation, a lot of historical societies do just become a all-in-one organization. It's a library, it's a museum, it's an archive, it's a preservation group. It's looked to fill all those kind of needs in a community. Although I would say most tend not to get involved in, I'll call it hardcore preservation issues, because there's just so many political pratfalls and people are scared of offending the donor or something. So that's what I've seen. Lewis started its own historic preservation awards. I forget what year we did that, but we kind of flipped it around a little bit and we said, you know, rather than, and it's not a new concept, but rather than always criticizing somebody for doing the wrong thing or pointing out a bad thing happening, let's celebrate the people who are doing a good job. You know, and I can't really think of too many other examples like that in the state of Delaware.
And Newcastle County used to do it, but that went by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a nice thing to be able to do in Brandywine. That's something easy. That's usually a big win, right? I mean, if anything, what's going to happen is that someone's going to say, "Why didn't you pick me? Don't you know what I was doing?" You know, I mean, but that could even be something you could do every year. That'd be even a good fundraiser, you know, to be able to say, we'll put up give you a little plaque to put in your window or on your house or on the fence or something, and we'll give out 3 or 4 of these a year and build some awareness. And you're kind of telling Brandywine Hundred's history at the same time. So, Dave, I see your hand is up again.
Well, if you don't mind my indulging in a flight of fancy, everybody's probably got ideas about buildings, but 2 that come to mind for me, and one of those 2 in particular, are the old original Mount Pleasant schoolhouse that's on Bellevue, which is sort of mothballed right now, and in even worse condition, the old Bellevue train station. And the reason I bring up the train station is because there's so many tie-ins. I've heard a rumor from a buddy I grew up with that his sister has been walking along parts of the Delaware River that I didn't even realize were being developed as park, but it's been creeping up from Edgemoor toward Philadelphia. And I think Claymont may have an interest in some of what's going on the riverbanks. And if the parkland along the river there is really expanding, then there's so much that could be done interpretively, because that was a resort area until, you know, fairly far along in the Industrial Revolution. Charles Dickens's illustrator vacationed there and did work for Dickens or he actually, yeah, I guess he vacationed there. But there's on Ridge Road there, south of Claymont, behind the Orthodox Church, there's a whole bunch of beautiful old houses sitting up that used to have a view of the river. And of course, the Bellevue farmstead ran right down to the bank. The treasurer of the DuPont company used to catch the train at that train station. And so, you know, and if you do anything with a train building, the train people are going to be hysterically enthusiastic about it. They might even be able to figure out a way to run excursions that tie into the interpretive center at Greenbank with the Wilmington and Western. So there's just a bunch of ideas, and it's right at the end of the Greenway. So, and the state is interested in the Greenway and Bellevue, and because they're interested in Bellevue and the conference center, which is now the old house on Bellevue, then they might take an interest in the train station as well. I just see a whole bunch of potential tie-ins there, but you know, you've cautioned us about thinking too quickly about buildings. The other thing I would say about a building comes from a briefing I went to on watershed restoration last week, which revealed the startling piece of information, I think from the EPA, that when you're writing a grant and you have volunteer labor involved, you can build that volunteer labor into your grant at a going rate of $28 an hour. That makes a grant look really good in terms of a local contribution to the grant. And you know, Bonnie, I had this idea. I'm a little bit sad to say, in connection with that old farmhouse that used to sit up on the embankment above the junction of Falk Road and Concord Pike before it all got torn up. But the reason I'm thinking about this in connection with the train station is because my fantasy features trying to interest. I actually did call Delcastle at the time, and they said the farmhouse is too far gone, but the train station is a Victorian or Edwardian relic, and it's still standing. So if it could at least be, you know, archaeologically mapped and restored with volunteer labor from the people who have to learn carpentry anyway at these Votech places, I just think there's a lot of potential there, and it needn't cost a mint, and it could attract some grant money and a bunch of interest. People are interested in what their kids do anyway. So I'll stop talking. Thanks.
Dave,
Sure.
I would love to talk to you more about this for some of the stuff that we're doing with the Eastern Brandywine 100 Coordinating Council. At some point, can I get some contact information from you?
Yeah, sure. I'll put it in the chat. I'm an open book. Thanks.
Okay.
I would say one thing I would caution, I mean, maybe not caution, that might be too strong a word, but just to think about actually acquiring a property. But if there's a way to work with the state, to work with the county, to work with different agencies, to work with the federal government, who did you say? I mean, did you say it was a state? Who is over there somewhere?
The state runs that farmhouse from
Yeah.
which the guy walked down to the train station. So
Yeah.
if they would be interested in operating that building as a total part of the end of the greenway and part of the property, I don't know if it's possible or not, but yeah, that would be a great way. And the Greenbank Station is a nice little interpretive place. It doesn't have a large room for archives, as far as I know, but there's a whole lot of information in a small space there. And a train station does have some room on the walls, and you could put a little museum lit in there.
Well, sometimes they may not see that, right? And I mean that in terms of the vision. They might, well, we got the Brandywine 100 Historical Society over here. They need a space. They could maybe be a nonprofit partner. You get into queue, you talk to your state reps and your state senators, and maybe some funding can be found, and you could be the nonprofit friend of that station or that building. That's certainly a model that the state has used. I mean, Fort Miles, Fort Delaware, up and down, I think every state park has a friends organization. So I mean, that's you're probably going to need a facility at some point, especially if you start getting things. So if there's a way to do that and to have the state, I mean, a great example of this is the Milford Museum. The Milford Post Office is owned by the old Milford Post Office is owned by the state of Delaware, and it's leased to the city of Milford for like $1 a year or something, right? And then the city of Milford and the Milford Museum, which is the same thing, the same entity, or the museum is part of the city. They, keep the lights on, things of that nature. The state comes in, fixes things from now and then, more major items. But it's a great relationship, right? It's a building that the state has that they weren't going to do anything with in the middle of downtown Milford that makes a wonderful museum. And if the train station could fulfill the same need, and the state has a nonprofit partner that runs it, staffs it, to use that term loosely, with volunteers, and keeps it open to the public a few days a week or several times a month, that's a win-win for everybody.
They might be attracted by local sweat equity too.
Sure.
I believe that Wilmington and Western put a lot of volunteer effort into restoring the station. I don't know that for sure, but I do know for sure about the hand car because I helped restore that thing. That was in my buddy's garage in Grayling Crest.
Oh, sure. And the state has the biggest budget in the state and the most resources in the state, but they still rely on volunteers. I can speak firsthand. I mean, Fort Miles down here, I mean, there's a group called the Bunker Busters, and they're the ones who fix all those metal rails that take all the things around the fort and build replicas of stuff. And they could not do nearly what they've done at Fort Miles without volunteers. So it's a great message, and something I would hope you guys would think seriously about. So
Absolutely. Sorry, I think it's seems to me it's daunting, but it seems to me you kind of have to have a place before you can. I mean, I know you mentioned we can use like a storage unit or something like that, but I don't know. There are some vacant buildings around owned by the county or state that could be potential places for us for sure, like in partnership.
Partnerships are key.
Yeah.
A lot of
You know what,
churches that have empty space.
So what was that, John?
There are a lot of churches that have empty space.
Churches and other buildings, yeah.
How about the Grange?
The Grange actually in Tallyville
Mm-hmm.
is,
Yeah.
well, that's owned by Ralph and Rose Pepe, and they've restored it. It's in great shape, and they're renting it right now to a church. So
Okay.
it's not used a lot, but it is used, and it's furnished, it's occupied, it's taken care of. I mean, it's it's not threatened. Not that we have to have a threatened building, but it would be nice to save some of the
Save something. Right.
Get a twofer
Right.
if we could.
there's a mothballed building, and I don't know who's involved with it, but it was the first Quaker meeting house in Brandywine 100 in Newcastle County, as far as I know. It's the old New Ark meeting that sits off Baynard Boulevard. You're laughing, and you know something about the place.
Anne's been restoring it for the last couple years.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank
You know
you.
what?
Yes.
And while we have you on, you wanted to make an announcement earlier, and we didn't let you do that.
Well, that's okay, because I think this is a perfect time to say what I wanted to say. The board of directors and a lot of volunteers, we are in the process of restoring the Newark Union Church, and of course the cemetery as well. We're doing stone wall repair. We're raising headstones and footstones, and we put in a military memorial in the middle of the cemetery last year. But as far as the church, it's been, like I said, closed up since 1970. But last year we did restoration of the outside, and it's completely done. Then this year we are focusing on restoring the inside, and we were fortunate to get a very generous grant from Crystal Trust, and we are pursuing some other grants as well. But we're working towards that, and our goal is to have the interior restored this year and open it up in 2023 for as a museum, highlighting lifestyle of Brandywine 100 in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And also to highlight the veterans. We have 73 veterans now in the cemetery, from the Revolutionary War all the way through to Vietnam. So to highlight some of their stories and artifacts of those wars. We've honored each one of those veterans with a medallion, marker, and flag that the Newcastle County Council Finance Committee provided a grant for us last summer to do that. But we also are going to have it open for small meetings. So we'd like to extend a invitation for the Brandywine 100 Historical Society to consider the Newark Union Church as a possible meeting place in 2023. Then also it's possible, because we will be having a museum set up, to be able to handle some be a repository to some extent for some documents, pictures, artifacts, and such. So I'd like to offer that to this group as well. But we'd have to strongly work together to make sure it's all manageable and organized and such. And but we're going to have small meetings and also funeral services, because we're still having burials. There's a few plots left, and then also as a wedding venue, because we've already been approached and asked to have small weddings there. So that's our vision and our goal for 2023. So I wanted to share that with this group so that we can partner together.
It's awesome, Anne. Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
look forward to being able to meet there in person.
So
Oh, that's
Dave, you need to come out and see it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I keep missing the invitations for one reason or another, but I'll get there. I know I will.
Yeah. The picture of it that you put on the Facebook page was a picture taken before 2020, because the electric wasn't even connected at that time. So if you were to come out and drive by and see it now, it's just amazing. We've had some wonderful vendors, wonderful volunteers. We've had vendors that are very passionate about historic preservation, and they've done a wonderful job and such. It's quite a sight to see, and we'll open it up. You can see where we're at on the inside too.
Just one thing, it's 8:15. I don't want to keep Mike here all night. We can stay here all night. Is there anything, has any other questions for Mike?
Sure.
I'll be brief with this one. I hope I heard you right, Mike. Were you suggesting that it might be good if different historical societies up and down the estuary could kind of link up, like, Claymont, us, Old Swedes, Port Clinton? I'm probably missing some. What do you think?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, that was, yeah, the short answer, absolutely. It's, you'll learn from each other. It's just good to get to know each other. I mean, I just had lunch last week with the director of the Rehoboth Beach Historical Society. I mean, we still connect, and between Milton, Rehoboth, Lewis, Milford, we had our own little natural area. You guys have your natural area too. So, definitely talk shop, talk about your problems, talk about issues, talk about all the successes you're having, and it's just a good group of people. I would highly recommend that.
I guess my related question to that, to what I said earlier is, I mean, it sounds to me like most historical societies actually do own properties, which are really museums in one way or another. So the Small Museums Association is really sort of it's really for historical museums, but / historical societies. So there's not like a Historical Society Association of Delaware.
No, it's
Right.
definitely the Delaware. There's the Delaware Museum Association. Yeah, there's not really a Historical Society Association. There's a couple national groups, and the one that would be most relevant for what you're doing and for most history organizations is called it's AASLH, the American Association for State and Local History, and that represents history organizations of all kinds, everything from Colonial Williamsburg to the nascent Brandywine 100 Historical Society. So it all steps in the revolution and size and everything else. So that would be ASLH would have a lot of great resources, and they have a pretty extensive document library, which I'm sure is now on their website somewhere to refer to about every phase of this, whether it's archives or fundraising or historic house management and all kinds of obscure things you never thought you'd get yourself into when you're organizing a history organization.
Perfect, thanks.
But yeah, SMA would be great. And most museums, when you think of museums, you probably think of art museums, right? And, that's what most people, I think, tend to think of. Natural history museums, science centers, etc. The vast majority of museums in the country are historical societies and history organizations by far. And there's a lot of really sophisticated resources for art museums and for science centers and natural history museums and zoos and aquaria and all those kind of places. But history museums, unless you're Colonial Williamsburg or Conner Prairie or Monticello or Mount Vernon or something, there's not a lot of resources out there. But ASLH, SMA, those are two great organizations.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks for all of your
Of course.
insight tonight. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck. And I know Terry will keep us all praised, and I hope sometime you guys can come before the Delaware Heritage Commission with a grant proposal to kick things off, or to maybe even do your markers, or to write a book, or to do something, or to have Terry do one of his famous videos. Terry wants to sign up to manage another video project, right? So, but thank you guys, and thank you for all your enthusiasm, and good luck.
Thanks an awful
Thanks so
lot, Mike.
much,
All right.
Mike.
Thank you,
Really
Mike.
appreciate it.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Well, I know we've lost a few people as the evening went on. I don't necessarily know what people want to do next. How do we make a commitment and form a nonprofit? We just keep meeting like this until something sort of organically happens, or we kind of agree on a path forward. We can get another speaker for next month. If anyone has any ideas, that would be great.
If you want to pursue becoming a nonprofit, you might want to get started sooner than later. We went through that with the Newark Union Church and Cemetery in September of 2020, and it took a long time to put together all the information for that and to submit that form to the IRS. And then we didn't get acknowledged until January of the following year. Got our official 501c3 status. So
because I've been involved in 2 nominations or applications recently, and they didn't take that long. And if you use the easy form, it's actually really easy.
The Department of State,
it depends on how much you think.
State is really helpful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it depends on how much you think your income is going to be. But if you know your income is not going to exceed, I think it's 50,000 a year for the first 3 years, or at least you're projecting it won't, then you can fill out the easy form. And the Zor Church group that I'm involved with in Odessa, we did it, and it was simple. The easy form was simple, and it didn't cost that much doing it ourselves. And it took about, I think it took maybe about 6 to 8 months to get the answer, to get the certification. Who knows what it is right now, but
Yeah.
anyway, so I'm not sure if you guys filled out the more complex form
Yeah.
because you had
Yeah.
more income anticipated.
It's not that I think it's not because we had income. We have an investment account that the interest of that maintains the property. So I think that's where we had to provide more information and such like that. So well, it's good that you are familiar with the process, and you have some advantages there.
So I mean, I don't know that we're ready to take that step, but I think we will at some point. I just don't know if we're there right now.
There's not a huge downside to setting up a 501c3. There really isn't.
And I know a lot of folks have mentioned that when they see a Friends of like Friends of the Pigeon Run Cemetery or Friends of this other group, they want to jump on and become a member. So yeah, once you establish a group, I think, like Terry said, that would be definitely an advantage.
Terry, Mike mentioned the Heritage Commission. Do they give grants for startup costs?
You don't ever remember that we have. I've been on the commission for 13 years, and I don't remember that we have.
I know that, okay, we could look at it.
I think hi guys, I'm Kayla.
Hey, Kayla.
Hi. I have to be honest with you, I probably have to go look at the email a little bit more carefully, but I swear I saw an email by, I think her name is Lisa. She's like a councilwoman. Let me go pull up her email. She's basically saying that she's, say that name again?
Lisa Diller?
No, she's like Lisa Rochester, that she's basically actually taking, she's looking for applications to basically give money out for community projects. It says 2022 community project funding.
Lisa Blunt Rochester. That's
yes.
U.S. Congressperson. I know, I saw that email too. We should look, I don't know exactly what she's looking for. I don't know if something like this would qualify for that.
I opened the application and it did seem a bit daunting, to be honest with you guys. It seemed pretty, it's a pretty long application, but I mean, I feel like this should fit within the, parameters of what she's looking for. So that might be something we could look into.
Yeah, maybe, well, you mentioned, Terry, it's not hard putting together a 501c3, and I'm delighted to hear that people have had good experiences with that. I've always heard it's a 2-year process, but maybe they've streamlined it.
They have, yeah.
Yeah,
they didn't used to have the easy path.
Yeah. Well, you gotta have somebody who doesn't mind filing the Form 990 every year. And I, back in the day when I had to do it, I just made sure, I had an accountant do it because it's multi-pages and everything. Even if you have
it's not anymore. Now they have the easy. If you don't make more than 50,000 a year,
yeah, good.
You send in a postcard. And actually, you do it online. You don't even have to answer any questions, really.
The reason I brought up the C3 is because I don't know if that would help a grant application if it was in process, whether it would help a federal application. And I was going to suggest that maybe if we could find a student at the college level, a history student who would be interested in working in the community under a grant to help identify projects under some set of criteria, it might give the organization a boost and use some of that money and get some publicity and generate some more interest from possible members and, kind of start things snowballing a little bit.
John Cartier and I could give some money, but I think we're both out of money until July 1st. So we could both do $2,500 as what total max in July. So that's one thing we could definitely do to help. And that's not too far away either, but.
Are you talking about that as a match for federal funding or?
No, just as a grant for whatever cost to start up.
Well, if there's federal money lying around, why not figure out a way to use it?
Well, no, well, yeah, I mean, we can look into the opportunity Kayla mentioned.
My experience so far, most of the grants that you apply for, you have to be a designated official 501c3. And then some of them you have to be established. There's, I think, 2 I've come across, you have to be established for at least 2 years as a 501c3. So, we don't qualify yet. Next year we will. But so, yeah, you pretty much have to be formal to get, a lot of the formal grants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. They wouldn't give it to the state, would they? A state partnership with a local interest group like us? Or I keep saying us as though you've let me in. I shouldn't, but thank you.
Us is whoever shows up every month. It's only our 3rd meeting.
No, the one grant that I know that you have to be established for 2 years is a Delaware state grant.
The grant and aid, you have to be at least 2.
Right, that's it.
I mean, for capital costs, which obviously we don't have a building right now, but there is a grant opportunity coming up, the Community Reinvestment Fund, which is that's state level. If we were going to partner with the state or the county on a building, we could apply to that. But I don't think we're ready for that yet. I mean, there's a lot of conversation. Like we were talking about it earlier about Ivy Side on Naaman's Road, which is owned by the county, and maybe somebody mentioned. Oh, I think he's not here anymore. Mentioned living across from the Jester Farm project. So, which is a public-private partnership between the Jester Art Space nonprofit and the county. So we could do something similar to that for Ivy Side, or that's the one that comes to mind. But county owns a couple other places as well. And then the county could apply for the Community Reinvestment Fund to get Ivy Side, halfway restored anyway. That's what I'm hoping that they will do. I did ask Tracy about that, but I got to follow up with her. So anyway, I think, we're such early days here. We're not ready to tackle anything too big, I don't think. But
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about buildings and I'm thinking about, I guess it's the old Bonsall farmhouse behind the Brandy 100 library.
that's another one. That's small though. It's really small, apparently.
Well, it's on a walking path, which is on the Shellpot Creek. And so that kind of leads in the direction of the old Newark meeting and the Greenway, if those walking paths could be extended. Kennett Square did that. They did a lot of right-of-way stuff that established walking trails kind of through the borough, their own little greenway kind of, but a lot of it was along Creekside, so it's kind of pretty. Anyway, another flight of fancy. There's plenty of ideas, I can just tell.
Well, any ideas for a speaker for next month? I don't know if we could maybe get, Mike mentioned Lee Raffensperger from the Delaware Museum Association. Maybe we could invite him. Him, her, I'm not sure if Lee's a man or a woman, sorry.
Yeah.
Her.
Lee, okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
Why not? That might, help to establish a connection between the two groups, and Mike was recommending such a connection.
I have to tell you, early before we even had our first meeting, I did reach out to the Delaware Historical Society and its current ED, and I can't say that he was very encouraging, to be honest with you. So whatever, take it with a grain of salt, but.
All I'll say to that is, and you can read into it what you want, but is no comment.
Well, they've been around forever. Maybe they're kind of mossy. Maybe they need us to start showing signs of life and getting them excited about us, and then they'll want to align with us. Who knows?
I mean, I'm the eternal optimist, so the grass is always greener in my world, but I think he might be the kind of person where the glass is half empty all the time rather than half full. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I think is it David Young you spoke with? Yeah, he's kind of on a higher plane.
He thinks.
No comment.
That's also what I've been told, but he is what he is. So someday we'll connect with him. And
I used to know a guy in the Historical Society, staff member or high-placed volunteer. This goes way back, like 40 years, and he's gone now, so I can talk about him. He can't defend himself. But anyway, he was the closest human. He impressed me as the closest human being to Mr. Spock on Star Trek, with the possible exception of Bob Klezik's out at Harvest Market, who's a friend of mine, so I can talk about him. They called him Spock when he was running the Newark Co-op because he has this flat affect. Anyway, telling tales out of school. So another meeting, and are you guys still going to send me an invitation?
so we established at the first meeting that we meet on, what is this, fourth Mondays, right? That's today. So fourth Monday of every month until we either make something happen or we diminish one way or another. We're just kind of testing the waters.
What's the hold back on trying to formally start, like, I guess the society or the group and moving forward with it? Like, what's the concern?
Well, I mean, I guess my concern is just we've only had 3 meetings and we haven't really, every meeting there's been a different, like some people that are here tonight were at the first meeting, some not, some new people every month, some people have only come to 1 meeting. I don't think we really know, who's officially interested in being a part of it, like being a part of a corporate board. Those that are interested and willing to do that, we should all probably put a little money in. Someone needs to be the treasurer. We need to open a bank account probably. We need to get a little more formal to take that step. And I just not sure if we're ready to take that step yet, but it's up to everybody. I'm trying not to be the leader of this group. I was just trying to help it get started. And I mean, I'm happy to participate in everything, but I don't necessarily want to be the president or whatever. I'm just trying to encourage it to get off the ground.
I think that would be, my view of my own role as well. I'm chairman of EB 100, and I make a point not to get involved in too many things, and I could also see potential conflicts of interest down the road, but I'm certainly interested in helping it get started.
So Kayla, you didn't introduce yourself. What's your background and what brings you here tonight?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Kayla Lahijani. I apologize I did not introduce myself sooner. I kind of joined a little bit late. So I am born and bred in Wilmington, Delaware. I absolutely love the Brandywine 100 area. I'm very devoted to it. And I just, in general, genuinely, I just feel like it doesn't get the amount of attention that it deserves. And then I think it has so much more potential than what I'm currently seeing. And I think in particular, what drove me to this meeting tonight is I do think that we have a lot of history that we should be tapping into and also preserving. And I really love the state of Delaware, and I kind of want to be its cheerleader and help market it and put it on sale, so to say. So that's really why I am here. And I'm very happy actually that this is being put together, because I do think that we need to focus a lot more in our area on historical, just give it a little bit more of a historical feeling and bring attention to what it deserves.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Just out of curiosity, Dee, I know where you live. I know where Mary Ann Carant lives. I live in Gordon Heights, which is just south of Belfort. Where does everybody else live in Brandywine?
I'm from Eden Ridge 3.
Okay,
I live in Beaver Valley.
okay,
I live in Concord Manor.
okay.
I live across from the Newark Union Church in Cemetery.
Right. Dave, how about you?
And so does Cynthia, right?
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
my
glad-
back, Newark Union Cemetery is in my backyard.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great.
Dave, where do you live?
I'm glad Pam spoke first. I'm not in the 100 anymore. I'm actually in Mendenhall, Pennsylvania, but
Okay,
I keep a toehold in Delaware because I have a small rental place near Salesianum School, but that's not the 100 either.
okay.
So, one other idea I had was I've done some writing and been a reporter, and those little sepia colored paperback books, history books that are based on photographs. I forget the name of the organization that puts them out, but I wrote to them once when I was living in Mansion House, the old mansion that's next to, oh gosh, what's the name of that park? It's on Kyemensi Road. Anyway, it's right down that way, not far from the railroad. And I was thinking about doing a project on the creek there, because not very much has been done about the industrial base and the families, and they're not, a lot of the older members are either gone or going. But something like that could be done in Brandywine 100. And there you go, there's one of them. That looks like their format. 40 acres, okay. Well, see, if it hasn't been done yet in Brandywine 100, then I'm thinking that a writing project, which is not terribly extensive, it's based on photographs. Those books are photographs and captions, basically. And I think they must sell like hotcakes, or the supermarkets wouldn't sell them.
Yeah.
So it might be a way to drum up interest, get people from some of the older families interested and involved, because we'd be reaching out to them and saying, do you have photographs that you wouldn't mind sharing as part of a history book about Brandywine 100?
The only one done in Brandywine 100 of those books is there was one done for Claymont.
Okay, yeah, well, we've got the whole Shellpot Creek, the Swedish and Native American presence there. There's Naaman's Creek inland from Claymont. There's plenty of potential. I mean, all those old farmsteads, and some of those families, as we know, Bonnie, are still around. So, it's something I would be interested in getting involved with, and I could help with. I do enjoy writing, and I've gotten more into it during the pandemic. I'm not an expert photographer, but a lot of the photographs, of course, being historic, they're already done.
Yeah,
So,
most of the photographs they use are the historic ones.
right.
We just did one for the Gibraltar Gardens, and
Great.
so I
Yeah.
do know a little bit about. It wasn't free. There was a cost you had to put up. I think we put up almost $2,000 as a down payment, and then you get certain number of, like 40 books or something like that once it's published, and which you can in theory resell to recoup some of your costs. But I love the idea. I think it needs a lot more discussion, like who's going to lead the project. Do we need startup funds? We'd have to approach them, and there might be multiple books that could be done, like focused on different things.
Somebody from the Beaver Valley effort had been trying to convince me to do one on the Beaver Valley Mills a few years ago, and I'd started putting together a lot of material, never really did anything with it. But there's no shortage of material out there for many different areas, and that was just one. I mean, you could easily put a whole book together just on the Beaver Valley Mills. I used to lead the hikes through there, so
I love that idea, Sam. That's an awesome idea.
It really is. Yeah. Are you in touch with John Crossan?
He was the person I was talking about. Small world.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I know John, and I'm really impressed with the walking tours and stuff that you guys are doing down there. I think it's great. And I tried to volunteer once to help track through some of the old mill races, because I just walk down there anyway with a, you know, a pair of pruning shears and take out some of the fox,
Yeah.
keep it open. But you know, so anyway, yeah, that's outside the 100. So, but I see potential. I'd be willing to be involved with that. I'd love to have somebody else to work with, because it helps keep me on track, because I'm doing too many things. But I
Well,
think
Pam, why don't we raise some money and get yours, since yours is halfway underway, get yours done first.
actually, maybe I'm wrong. Pam is does Brandywine 100 run all the way down to the Brandywine, or does it stop?
Brandywine 100
Oh,
goes.
yeah, it does. Absolutely, yeah.
Well,
It
then-
goes-
Beaver Creek crosses back and forth, so,
It
you know,
goes-
it's claimed by both sides.
I'm
but-
sorry. Yeah, that was my fault. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of
That's all
Christianity.
right.
You know.
No,
Yeah.
it goes west of the Brandywine. Trying
Really?
to find my image. Hold on. I put it on the I put it in the email that I sent out.
Great. Yeah. Well, if it, let's see, where's the Big Ben's in Pennsylvania. We can't use that. Anyway, yeah, that would be
Wait a
wonderful.
minute. Ugh, wait, sorry. Trying to. Here's the map. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Yep, that's the old Pomeroy and Beers, yep.
Okay, yeah.
So I guess no. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is just to the river.
Well, but is Wilmington outside it, or I mean,
Well, this is
Wilmington is
old.
now its own 100.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can
I
see
see.
that.
That's cool. Yeah,
I don't
think,
know if is that the city line has changed though. That's not
Oh,
the
yeah.
city line anymore, right?
Oh, of course.
No,
Yeah.
that's 1868.
Is this blue ball right here? The intersection
That is
of,
Brandywine Village.
wait, that's filled, that's,
Village,
wow. So,
Blue
Blue-
Ball,
that's
yeah, there
Blue
you go.
Ball.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's Blue
yeah,
Ball.
so if that's crazy if that's Brandywine Village.
It is. Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, you know, if there's energy already in the Beaver Mills project, that sounds wonderful. I think of that as tying in more with the national park than with a general project that would take in a lot of the families in toward more closer to the center of Brandywine 100, like the Falk families and you know, whoever's remaining from up there.
Now that I think about it, there's also one of those little books about Arden as well, and I think you could probably
Oh,
do
yeah.
another one about Tallyville.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't
Yep.
know
The
Valleyville.
no
Heritage
shortage of
Commission,
topics.
or the EB 100 has worked with Bellefonte they are doing something, not one of those, but something similar about the town of Bellefonte.
Yeah, yeah. I know that there's also, I think, Nancy Sawin's drawing book of different road rights of way and some of the historical houses, and there's also a book of regional trolley lines that you know traces those through the greater Wilmington area, I believe. So I've got that book somewhere back here. You know, so yeah.
We need that
Oh, yeah.
title of your trolley book. We need that title.
Oh, really? Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, yeah. It's the Arden. I just found out from a resident who's an old friend, is opening a walking trail down to the site of the old Arden train station, which of course no longer exists. The right of way has changed and everything, but you know, that's another tie-in with trains and another walking path that people might want to be aware of. So yeah.
Good.
Wow. Okay. So what would be the path forward to try to, you know, continue to gather energy that might bridge the gap, Dee, between where we are and where we would need to be to file for nonprofit status? Do you see one of these books being the leapfrog mechanism, or is there something better?
I don't know, maybe. Pam, who was it that was spearheading that, other than you? You said somebody approached you about it?
Well, it was John Crossan, actually.
Oh,
because
okay.
He had been involved in the Beaver Valley Conservancy as well. He's now,
Okay.
I guess, on the town council for Concord Township, but it was, came out of the whole history hikes. And, I mean, there was so much interest and so many people came out. It just, I haven't done one in a while simply because I wasn't, with the Park Service being there, it kind of changes the landscape a little bit. But, and I'm glad you brought that point out because that just made me think about, do we need permission? I mean, I certainly hope not, but, for a book or something, but it does change the landscape a little.
Well, and that a book on Beaver Valley would cross state line too, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
maybe,
yes.
maybe it could be a
Yeah.
joint effort between Concord Historical Society and the Brand New 100 Historical Society.
John lives on the Pennsylvania side, I think. So if we
Yep.
take
Yeah, he does now.
we could build a
He
fire.
lived on Ramsey Road. Yeah.
Yeah, we can poke him to try to get him to get working on the Pennsylvania side.
Well, I can find out who, like, the contact information that did at the company that did the Gibraltar book, if you want.
Yeah,
And-
I think Terry's got it in the back of that book he showed us. Probably, that's how I found them.
Publishers were Arcadia Publishing.
That's it. Yeah, you just
Yeah.
they have a website and a phone number, and I called them up. And there was actually I was emailing back and forth with them now that I think about it, but they were enthusiastic. I mean, they're eager to drum up business. This is what they do. So yeah, I'd be interested. And to quote a line from Hollywood, Pam. Why do one when you can do two at twice the price? Maybe we should work on projects if we could get one person who is energized, who would be interested in each one of these things, and willing to, do some phone calls, make contacts with families, have some degree of, I suppose, sensitivity and tact approaching people, and maybe have a family connection of their own to say, hi, I grew up here, or Bonnie, I have old family roots here. I'm thinking of putting up some of my family pictures to go into this new book. Could we interest you in it? I shouldn't sound like I'm trying to volunteer you, Bonnie. It's
I have a lot of irons on the fire. I am interested. I mean, I am a sales position full-time, so I'm on the phone a lot anyway. As long as I can carve some time out somewhere in there. I do research at 4 a.m. just because that calls me. But yes, I'm definitely interested. Definitely. I'm in the auto business. So the end of the month, especially now, is usually hard to get on here. That's why I haven't been on the first 2 calls, because I was trying to make a goal. But this month I was lucky enough to hit goal way before the end of the month. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here,
Bonnie?
Bonnie.
Yes.
In your family history, are you aware of the Tally Falk Cemetery?
I keep asking about that and I don't know where it is. I actually stopped at Paulie's cemetery, memorials, and he told me about Newark Union. That was
It's Tally Folk is on the northwest corner of Folk and Naaman's. It's kind of, if you know where the gas station used to be, it's up in between that, which is now, I can't
Is it
remember
the
what
one right
but
next to Foshi Photography?
Foshi Photography.
yes, it's in between, and it's in atrocious.
Yeah,
It-
we
The
met out there.
photography people did a wonderful job of cleaning it up, but they don't own it. It's really not owned at all. So
so how
it's
do
a
you get
project.
there? How do
No,
you
we,
get there?
Well,
were
there's a
working-
right of way that goes through that property, but I don't know if those people are aware of it.
If you park at Foshi Photography, it's literally right
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
like at the parking lot. And
yeah.
Okay.
we met there about a year ago with James Hanby because he was trying to figure out how to claim ownership of it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
It's been basically like unclaimed for like 30 years or something. I
Yeah,
forget
it's-
exactly.
technically owned by Lawrence Tally, and I think he's been dead for,
Yeah,
Wow.
it's-
40 years or
it's in
something.
terrible shape though. And so James should really be part of that conversation. But
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. Please include me.
I don't
in
know what
this.
he's done since we met out there, and he was gonna, I don't know what he was gonna do, file with the court or whatever. I don't know what's happened. I haven't heard anything.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's abandoned. I don't know what the process is
I know,
for
I
that.
know James Hamby and John Cartier are doing something about it.
Okay.
Well,
We
that's
were
what the meeting I was involved in.
okay. Because we were trying to see about possibly connecting with it, because there's the same families in Newark Union Cemetery. I saw that it seemed to be under the care of someone that lived in Coffee Run community up in, I think,
Hockessin?
in Hockessin. But anyway,
Okay.
there's possible connections.
I'm
Okay.
on the,
But it needs a lot of help.
Yes.
I'll circle back to, I mean, James is sort of the elephant in the room too. He was at our first meeting, but he didn't attend last month or this month. And I mean, he, he's got like so much knowledge in his head of Brandywine 100. I'd really, like him to be involved in whatever we decide to do.
Yeah.
So.
I just was at a little mini briefing during a historical meeting houses committee meeting that I sit on that committee for Western Quarter, the Quakers in Southchester County. And there was talk there of the ways in which these cemeteries that have a perpetual commitment. Now, I don't know about private family cemeteries, but the ones that were connected with Quaker meeting houses, for example, there are laws apparently that protect those properties. So we could sell, for example, a disused meeting house and the land around it, but we might not be able to sell the cemetery. There might have to be some perpetual kind of arrangement for that property being held. Maybe not the responsibility of the Quakers anymore, and it might go into limbo. I don't know what happens with that stuff. But these people are in the ground, and they expected to be there till Judgment Day. So I think there are rules in place about that stuff. But I don't, unless it's one of the Hanby guys I was in school with, then I don't know the guy. Like to meet him though. And there's since we're talking about it, there's that other disused cemetery that runs off a marsh road up near the junction with Veal. It's all overgrown. And that's been in limbo too. It's just a patch of woods as far as I know.
Where is that, Dave?
If you're going out Marsh Road toward the commercial area, Grayling Crest and Brandmar, it's on the right, I think a couple hundred yards before you get to Veal Road, and it's visible because it's just all overgrown. As I recall, I saw a news article about it in the News Journal at one point, and it's just a rectangle, fairly narrow in the road frontage, but it goes straight back for like a couple of 100 feet.
Is it the Allen Tract that's recently been made a county park?
Could be. I haven't been back that way.
That's been a county park. They just renamed it, and they're.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe. This guy, my memory of this may be ancient, like 20, 25 years ago.
And there's a cemetery in there. Do you know about that, Dee?
I didn't know there was a cemetery, but Terry, Mary Ann would know, I would think.
Could be my faulty memory too, but that was my sense of why the property had not moved over the years, is because there were some burials there.
Huh.
I don't remember
entirely-
there being a cemetery back there, but I could be wrong.
Well, I'm sorry if I'm wrong. There's a lot of things knocking around in my brain.
I do think, I don't know if anyone has time for this, but for the question is asked, so like, what are our next steps? I think one thing that we could do, if someone has time or interest, is, to do a little research maybe of other historical societies, and maybe, we probably should draft like even just a one-pager, like what we think a mission statement might be, and toss that around, and maybe kind of establish a little plan with some priorities and stuff, what we think we're going to do. So, I think that's the kind of thing that.
Pam may be our treasure, our resource on this, because she's part of an up and running group.
There you go.
It's a very small group, so I can speak to some things, but not to other things, that's for sure. And I joined it, you know, late in the game. That group, very much like some of the others, I mean, it came together around a particular property, a small laborer's house that was, you know, threatened by demolition by development, and, you know, it became their symbol and their mission. And I think, I don't know, I'm not sure. His talk made me think about a lot of things. That's all I'm going to say right now. I think taking some time to gel and really come together and figure out what we want this to be is definitely a very important step.
Yeah.
And
I think in
yeah.
the meantime, if we just kind of keep meeting and we have speakers about topics of interest and just kind of keep talking, you know, having these conversations, I think it will figure itself out. I was involved in a similar effort only a year ago, and you know that of this threatened church down in Odessa. But the difference is the group that came together for that was focused on preserving, protecting an endangered resource, like Pam just said, the laborer's house, like that was the purpose. We came together for that building. Yeah. So this group is a little different. We kind of don't necessarily know what our priority is or our mission is going to be yet. And so I think it might take us a little time to figure that out. At least, you know, what do we want to do in our first year? Like, what are the goals that we want to accomplish in the first year? I have no idea. So, but we start putting things down on paper, maybe, you know, it might all come together at some point.
Folks, I got to jump off. As you may have seen, I have a four-legged friend who has been asleep and is now awake and has his own agenda. And I've got to attend to him.
No, Terry, thanks for getting
to jump too.
And well, I welcome suggestions for speakers of next couple months. You know, email me, call me, whatever. And otherwise, we'll just kind of keep the conversation going, if that's okay with everybody.
This is Terry, just before you go, this is the older of two books on Brandywine Springs. And this is C.A. Westlager's book from 1949. It tells basically, I mean, its subtitle tells it, the rise and fall of the mineral springs business there. Bill Lawler is the Concord High School graduate who spearheaded the current Brandywine Springs organization and wrote the new book and did the maps and got all those markers organized. So that had at one time been a thriving organization. I don't know what they're doing now, but they might be able to serve as a model for us. Does anybody know how to reach him?
I know Bill. Yeah, I know Bill.
Good. Well, would you be willing to see if he would maybe at some meetings come and talk to us? You know,
yeah.
Yeah. There's things in common. You know, Brandywine Springs is on a creek. You know, we've got creeks in Brandywine.
Shellpot Park was very similar.
Yeah, it was. In fact, they competed with each other for the trolley traffic on the. Yeah. So, well,
I need to jump off too. But
all right.
It was really great.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it, and to be continued, I guess.
Well, thank you, Dee, for all your efforts.
Wonderful.
Really appreciate everything you're doing, Dee.
Thanks so much. Keep those ideas coming.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, you guys.
Everyone.
Bye.